Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to part number 10 of these discussions on the book Al-Mu'ajizah by Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh. As you might have guessed by now that this is part number 10. So if you haven't looked at the previous parts, please do so before indulging into this one. This podcast wouldn't make a lot of sense to you if you haven't watched the previous parts. Having said that, let's begin with today's reading. Inshallah, bi'awnihi ta'ala wa bi'ihsanihi. Bismillah. The chapter that we are discussing today is titled The New Linguistic Formulation. Like the literatures of other language groups, the pre-Islamic poets developed a pool of commonly used linguistic structures from which they drew for expressing their ideas and from which they rarely departed. As a consequence, they came to have set molds or templates that provided the linguistic backdrop to their poetry. Excuse me. We can trace most extant pre-Islamic poetry back to several hundred basic linguistic templates that were in circulation in the poetic market prior to the appearance of the Quranic revelation, and which made up what might be termed the infrastructure of the pre-Islamic qasidah or poem. Many of these templates continued to be used after the revelation of the Qur'an, and some of them are still employed by many poets with varying degrees of frequency. These templates were on the order of primary linguistic units that served as the basis for the overall structure of a poem or literary text, and only rarely would a poet, writer, or orator deviate from them or introduce a new template to enrich the old linguistic structure. I hope you guys are understanding this. This is easy to understand. These literary templates might be linked to pieces of a jigsaw puzzle or playing cards. Literatures would have already made pieces with which to form linguistic figures. Their poems or literary pieces thus formed, poems might look new to the outside observer. In reality, they were nothing but old molds or raw materials that had been used to create new forms. An overview of the opening lines of selected pre-Islamic poem is sufficient to illustrate the magnitude and frequency of this phenomenon in ancient Arabic poetry. So basically, what Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh is saying is that the Arabs had certain templates for poetry, and this is he's not just talking about bahur. There is an ilm, it's called ilm al-arud, ayn re ayn ra waw dad. Arud بفتح العين. Basically, you have a template. Fa'ilatun, 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 fa'ilat. You have a template upon which you will bring words to complete that rhyme scheme, that meter of the poem. It's the same with English, it's same with Persian, it's same with Urdu. In English, these are called meters. So there is a pentameter, there is iambic pentameter, which is black verse really. There are other types of meters, we're not going to go into that. But also what Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh is saying, and he's not just talking about the bahur, he's not just talking about arud, he's also talking about the expressional templates. The templates that have to do with expression. So they'll have different tarakib. And it is the same in almost every language. poetry has some sort of templates even for expressions, for tarakib. It is extremely rare for somebody to come along and invent a new tarkib. Very few poets have been able to do so. Mir Babbar Ali Unis would be one of the examples in Urdu Marthiyah, in the elegy of Urdu language. So would be Ghalib in some of his Urdu poetry. Juz qais na koi aur aya barue kar sahra magar watangi chashm hasud tha. But really Mutanabbi and other poets, they wrote according to those templates. They had templates. For example, قد يشيب الفتى وليس عجيبا أيرا النور في القضيب الرطيب. I can quote many examples, but that would be a wastage of time for people who don't understand Arabic. It's simply just understand that Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh is saying that the Arabic poetry has had templates to work with. As for the language of the Quranic revelation, it turned everything upside down. The Quran did not speak in and use the templates that the Arabs were used to. It shattered the old inherited molds and rent the traditional linguistic fabric to weave a fabric of its own and to cast new linguistic molds that were destined to send tremors through the length and breadth of Arab's literary language. These new forms were not limited to one part or aspect of the Quran. Rather, they encompass the book in its entirety, with the result that once people had become familiar with its language, they could easily recognize the Qur'an-ness of even a random sample consisting of nothing but a single phrase, expression, or construction drawn from any part of the book. Most Quranic linguistic forms do not repeat themselves. The unique flavor of Quranic The unique flavor of Quranic linguistic constructions might lead us to believe that they are repeated many times throughout the Holy Book, so that despite their newness and their distinctness from the construction that are well known in the Arabic language used both today and the days of the Prophet ﷺ, it is this repetition that enables us to recognize them easily as being Quranic in nature. Surprisingly, however, and despite the fact that there clearly is repetition in the Quran, the Quranic constructions which are not repeated are far greater in number than those which are. In fact, most of the uniquely Quranic constructions and expressions occur only once and no more. Yet, in spite of this fact, they retain their clear, distinctive flavor. As for the constructions used in non-Quranic Arabic, whether in poetry or in prose, we find it difficult to recognize them and retain their forms and structures unless they are repeated enough times for us to grow accustomed to seeing and hearing them. Hence, another remarkable feature of the language of the Quran is the ease with which we become familiar with its forms and structures even when they are not repeated. Someone might object here, saying, why claim that the Quran alone contains unique terms or phrases? After all, every writer on earth has his or her unique manner of expression and turns of phrase that are peculiar to his or her own writing. So, Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh is making a case that it is an aspect of the Quranic language that its expressions are not repeated and yet easily understood to be Quran, easily identifiable. This is not so with any other with any human expression. And if you raise an eyebrow to this claim, then let's find out in scientific concrete terms. Let's do an experiment and find out. However, no matter how much human linguistic styles may differ from one another, no matter how far apart they may be in terms of time and place, they do not always enable us to distinguish their authors one from another. It is not uncommon for two or more writers to have such similar styles that we get them confused. This fact will be clear to us if we take a single sentence from one writer's corpus and compare it with sentences produced by other writers. We might, for example, make a random selection of statements made by 5 Arab writers from various literary periods: Al-Ma'arri, Ibn al-Muqaffa, Ibn Hazm, Taha Hussein, and Mustafa Sadiq al-Rafi'i, and ask someone to match the statements with their authors. The statements are as follows. وأما الكتاب فجمع حكمة ولهوا وإن هذا ليولد من الحزن والأسف غير قليل يبتدعون أساليب ومناهج في نظم الكلام لا يخاف على ولده من اليتم ولكن الفن البياني يرتفع على ذلك. No matter how literarily, now this word is a tongue twister really. No matter how literarily skilled and sophisticated he or she happened to be, and no matter how insightful a critic, even a native speaker of Arabic would find it impossible to match these passages correctly with their authors unless it should happen by chance. If, on the other hand, we introduced a verse from the Qur'an, any verse, be it long or short, along with these 5 statements by human authors, taken though they are from the entirely different periods and originating from disparate literary schools, it would be easy for the most unpracticed reader of the Qur'an to distinguish it as having come from the Holy Book. And this is actually true, even if you are a Muslim or a non-Muslim. Even if you read the Qur'an in front of a non-Muslim, he or she will instantly, and they are a native speaker at least, they will instantly pick up on it. And they will say this is the Qur'an. This is a very distinguished feature of the Quranic language. There is an abundance of uniquely Quranic construction and expressions that do not repeat themselves, and we can easily identify a good number of them on any single page of the Qur'an. In order to ensure that our conclusions are objective and comprehensive rather than subjective and selective, we might take the first complete page of the Quranic text, which in most printed copies contains verse 6 to 16 of Surah Al-Baqarah. Even this small sample will make clear how numerous and varied such constructions and expressions are. On this one page alone, we find at least 23 of them. And each of them has a singular structure that sets it apart not only from expressions and constructions found widely in Arabic poetry and prose and those that occur in the prophetic traditions, but in addition from the other expressions and constructions on the very same page of the Qur'an itself. We will see that in addition to their uniqueness and distinctness, and despite the Qur'an's influence on the Arabic language as a whole and the attraction its refined style has held for Arabic writers down the ages, most of these expressions and constructions have remained unique to the Qur'an itself and hence easily distinguishable from human linguistic expression. Nor will we find a similar phenomenon in any other literary language down the ages. The following are the structures to which I am referring in the passage selected. So Ahmad Bassam Saeh lists now some expressions for us to look at. The first one of this is from Surah Baqarah. This is all Surah Baqarah, first page of the Quran, verse 6. سَوَاءٌ عَلَيْهِمْ أَأَنذَرْتَهُمْ أَمْ لَمْ تُنذِرْهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Then verse 7. وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. Verse 8a. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَقُولُونَ آمَنَّا. Verse 8b. وَمَا هُمْ بِمُؤْمِنِينَ. Verse 9. وَمَا يُخَادِعُونَ إِلَّا وَمَا يَخْدَعُونَ إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُمْ. Verse 10a. فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٌ فَزَادَهُمُ اللَّهُ مَرَضًا. Verse 10. وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. Verse 10c. بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْذِبُونَ. Verse 11a. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Verse 11b. قَالُوا إِنَّا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ. Verse 12a. أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ. Verse 12b. وَلَكِنَّ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. Verse 13a. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ آمِنُوا كَمَا آمَنَ النَّاسِ. Verse 13b. قالوا أنؤمن كما آمن السفهاء. Verse 13c. ألا إنهم هم السفهاء. Verse 13d. ولكن لا يعلمون. Verse 14a. وإذا لقوا الذين آمنوا قالوا آمنا. Verse 14b. وإذا خلوا إلى شياطينهم. Verse 14c. قالوا إنا نحن مستهزئون. Verse 15a. الله يستهزئ بهم. Verse 15b. ويمدهم في طغيانهم يعمهون. Verse 16a. أولئك الذين اشتروا الضلالة بالهدى. Verse 16b. وما كانوا مهتدين. As can be seen from the listing above, 4 of the Quranic constructions in this passage are repeated twice. However, none of the 23 constructions and expressions listing here resembles any construction or expression found in non-Quranic Arabic, including that used in the prophetic hadith. Hence, if we were to mingle any of these expressions or constructions with those employed in Arabic poetry or prose, readers could easily pick them out as being from the Qur'an and from nowhere else. How then did the Arabs living in the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century CE cope with this expressional storm that blew over them from Mecca? Where did the language of the Holy Qur'an stand in relation to the massive linguistic tradition that had flowered in the pre-Islamic era? What reaction would be forthcoming from the Arabs who up to that time had been accustomed to trading in a linguistic market that offered no more than a few hundred basic recurring linguistic templates or patterns, when all of a sudden they came in contact with a book packed with thousands of new linguistic forms that had been unknown to their poetry and prose alike, and that would remain unknown to Arabic literary production thereafter? These are the questions that he leaves for the reader to ponder over, and in the next chapter, inshallah, we're going to go through these questions. I hope you guys are having a blast. I hope you guys are enjoying this. And really, I urge you guys to get this book, put it in your home library, read it with your spouses, with your children, with your family members. Every single one of your family members really needs to understand this, needs to know about this. And so I wish you all the best of health and prosperity, inshallah. And until the next episode of this series, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.